How does digitization, how does the digital age influence our cultures of memory, our perception of history? This is one of the challenging questions in today's times. That said, we can see that actually as memory culture is to a very high extent mediatized, digitization and digital media already play a significant role for memory, for commemoration, for the perception of history on several levels. The first level is the level of preservation, and in this field digitization is already a very important aspect, for example for archives and museums, and this of course also has an impact on the ways how we are researching history and how we are exhibiting history. In the field of preservation, digital methods, especially the high-resolution digitization of material objects, especially scriptures, but also films, photographs, offers us a new possibility to store cultural heritage and to preserve it for the future. It sounds quite easy, so we just need to scan everything we have and then we have it in our possession, but the process of digitization is of course much more complex, and it usually also does not replace the necessity to continue to preserve to the best of our abilities the original material sources. So we will need to keep our kind of written archives. We need to preserve film materials of different kinds and media formats for the future, because having digital assets does not mean that these digital assets are accessible forever. So there are of course several obstacles. One obstacle which we already faced with classical media is, can we access it from the perspective of technical support? What additional technical instruments, machines do we need? We already saw this when with regards to audiovisual heritage, that it's sometimes difficult to access even rather new media formats like VHS, like videotapes, because we don't have anymore the necessary machines to do so. And with regards to digital objects, of course, we need the necessary encoding systems, we need to be able to read the files, so we already have difficulties sometimes to get data files from 20-30 years ago and make them running on our computers today. So this is one question. The other question is also of course how the digital assets change, transform, how this kind of affects the storage. So digitization offers new ways of preservation, it offers better and improved ways of access, but it also means that we need to continuously transform, copy, preserve also these digital assets, and that we also need to find ways to preserve the originals and the other media and document formats. So this is what is, so to say, happening at the back end of museums and archives. And having a digitized object also does not mean that it is necessarily accessible and that we can work with it. The next step of preservation also means annotation. It means to make these objects searchable. Otherwise, we just create another kind of storage. But this storage does not necessarily mean that we can access the information which are in this storage. Yeah, so the metaphoric image which Ebbrecht-Hartmann created for better understanding memory, to have on the one hand something like storage memory, which includes everything which is still there somewhere, but which does not mean that this is actually something that affects our present life and that we can commemorate or that we can work with, that can be made present, that is accessible. And on the other hand, a much smaller memory archive, which is the kind of functioning memory, which means that only what is properly accessible, what is searchable, what is somehow circulating, which is used from the storage archive, can become part of our collective and public memory, and can also be used as an asset for interpreting and also exhibiting the past. That means, when talking about digitization, a very important step is, of course, on a technical level, to make these documents, these files, searchable. Yeah, so this means text recognition, improved image recognition. How can we use automated tools to also make this huge amount of information accessible, readable? On the other hand, it also means annotation. Yeah, it means that we still need to work with these files and with the content. We need to create keywords. We need to create add more information, so-called metadata, in order to make such a complex collection of digitized assets usable for different purposes. So this is one aspect, the aspect of digitization. And when we are talking about history, especially contemporary history, and especially global historical events that fundamentally shaped our understanding of modernity, like, for example, the Shoah, the Holocaust, but also with regards to specific national histories, like, for example, the German history, the GDR history. We can just think about the files that were collected by the Stasi, by the East German secret police. So here we see huge and very important initiatives and huge progress with regards to digitization. Also considering the restoration of these assets. Yeah, we have, for example, with regards to the Stasi files, it is a fascinating phenomenon that it was possible to restore documents that were destroyed in the period following the fall of the Berlin Wall and the process of unification, when the East German secret police tried to get rid of at least parts of this huge amount of documents which they created while surveilling their own population. And with digital methods, it became possible to scan even fragments of these documents and automatically reassemble the original pages. This is something which is closely related to the kind of preservation of documents from the former GDR, and was a technology that was specifically designed for making accessible documents from this archive that were lost, that were actually not accessible at all, which didn't contain any information which a human being could access, could read, and it would not have been possible to kind of reassemble this manually like in a puzzle. But with the help of digital technology, with the help of machine learning, it was possible to restore many of these documents. So this is the field of digitization and the digital preservation of cultural heritage, and we see this with regards to written documents as well as with regards to photographs, with regards to other visual sources including paintings, and with regards to films. Although of course the information that can be extracted, especially automatically, from images, this is a much more complex and complicated process than text recognition and the possibility to make text searchable. This of course has an effect now on research, because suddenly as researchers we have access to a much bigger amount of documents, and we need to think about how can we make sense of these documents, how can we be able to read this big data collections. And here we need to talk about new methodologies that are developed in the context, for example, of historical research, but also in neighboring disciplines like cultural studies, like literature studies. And one important discipline in this regard, or subdiscipline in this regard, is of course digital humanities. Yeah, so how can we apply computerized methods to access digitized files, historical documents, a lot of historical documents, and process them in the way that we can extract new information. Information which maybe was not accessible for us with classical manual methods. Usually we compare this with the possibility of having kind of a distant view on this huge amount of documents, or on the literature of a period, which also includes non-canonic works, and the kind of close reading, the close view. And I think this is an important aspect which echoes, of course, also what we see in social science, the relationship between quantitative and qualitative methods. We also have this kind of distant view and the close reading, and we have also new methods of kind of statistically evaluating materials, and thereby maybe also creating new research questions and new research perspectives. Another aspect in this regard is what is the discipline of digital history. While digital history, of course, includes aspects of digital humanities as well as technological questions such as digitization and annotation of historical documents, but of course also the question of how to process and how to make accessible these collections is part of digital history processes, but also how to visualize these things in new ways. The other effect digitization in the context of preservation has is of course on exhibiting. First of all, we can now access much more facets of historical events by searching huge amounts of documents by using collections that are not kind of material collections, which are hosted at a specific place where we travel to and where we kind of sit in a library room or in a study room, and where we get files and where we scroll through paper. But now we can access, for example, online archives, online repositories. And we even have today online archives that completely follow a digital logics of databases as a relational system that creates interconnected networks of knowledge and of digital assets. An interesting project in this regard, in context of Holocaust research, is the ERI project, the European Holocaust research infrastructure, which is a joint project of several museums, archives, institutions that deal with the history of the Holocaust, and which created a kind of metadatabase which is accessing the digital collections of different institutions and make them searchable from one central digital online database. And this, of course, also transforms our whole understanding of an archive as a specific place with restricted access, with certain power structures. We now see that we encounter virtual spaces that are based on certain ways of user interaction with a system, with a specific environment, with a digital infrastructure, especially through search engines. This, of course, changes a lot the way how historical knowledge is distributed, and how we can also revisit historical sources, and how the interaction of researchers and source materials becomes again a very important and necessarily also to be reflected process in the process of writing history, in historiography, but also in the way how we are exhibiting history, how we are presenting the past in our present. And this brings us to the last aspect of the effect of preservation in the digital age, which is curation, digital curation. Of course, curation is a very important practice when it comes to museums, to exhibitions, also to historical exhibitions and historical museums. The question of how do we create a narrative by interrelating certain documents and sources from the past. How do we frame those? How do we connect them? How do they speak to each other? How do we make them accessible and readable for the visitors? But this was for most a process of kind of placing these sources often in relation to a specific place, or sometimes also, of course, in relation to people who are guiding and thereby explaining about the context of these documents. So it was a process of kind of creating a spatial constellation of these documents. And now we see that with the accessibility of digital sources, two different forms or two different understandings of curation are united, which is on the one hand the classical artistic interpretative way of curating materials, and on the other hand a database structured, annotation based, relational way of digital curation by creating new connections, new relations between different assets that then create also new forms of meaning, and to do this also in a variety of digital formats ranging from digital videos to online exhibitions to virtual exhibitions and the design of complete virtual spaces that also offer possibilities of um, uh, um, digital interaction with these objects, but it also of course includes the way how we use these digitized objects also in existing online platforms like social media platforms and environments. This means that curation becomes maybe the most important process of dealing with historical sources and make them accessible and readable in our present by creating relations, by establishing relations or revealing relations between these documents and between a variety of different digital assets ranging from video testimonies to audio files, photographs, films, texts, written texts, paintings, and so on that can now be kind of included in a virtual environment, including participatory engagement of the users themselves that become co-curators of these environments, and that we also have a kind of transformation of what was once seen as the archive, today the online repository or online collection, and the museum, today the online exhibition, or even the inbuilt way of kind of curating as different digitized assets within such a repository or within such a platform, by the way of opening different windows, by the way of kind of creating connections, by the way of annotating additional information, text, captions to specific materials, by the way of uploading them to social media profiles, by the way of integrating them into a digital video or in a presentation. So all of this is part of a kind of changing, transforming practice of digital use of historical sources and documents, which makes digital curation a kind of meta form of historical storytelling and participatory commemoration in the digital age that includes elements of historical research, of archiving, and of storytelling with and through digital media.